for that enlightening pre-conversation. I want to welcome everyone tonight to another episode of our happy hour sponsored by Indiana Adoption Network. I'm Marcie Keithley, along with Jennifer Falsing and Pam Krosky, and we're looking forward to speaking with all of you tonight. We're going to continue the topic of the male adoptee, led by our very own Ridge and his guests, which he'll introduce here in just a few moments. If you would please go ahead and give us a shout out in the chat bar, let everybody know what state or country you're calling from. We're going to reserve the questions to a little bit later. We do like to do a little bit of housekeeping first, so Jennifer, can you put the graphics up? This is just a little bit about us for those of you that are joining us for the first time, who we are. We are Indiana Adoptee Network based out of Bloomington, Southern Indiana, and Fort Wayne. We do host a national annual conference that's been postponed until May of 2021. We do webinars, videos, and Zoom meetings. Our sister organization is here. That's the legislative sleeve. We do partner with other nonprofits. We provide a newsletter, author books, and so forth. So these are some of the things that our organization does. You don't have to be a Hoosier to be a part of us. Thank you, Jen. And then we've got one more disclosure. There we go. They're small tonight.
I know.
For someone like me that's having difficulty,
Jen, I can't read that.
I'm having trouble reading it.
I can't read it at all.
But,
all right, hold on a second. Well, I already know what it says. So for everybody's safety, we are going to lock everybody on mute through the main talk. If you have something that you want to say, you can unmute yourself. That's when we do the Q&A. This is a public meeting. Well, now I can't see anything, Jen. I can't see anything. There is a suicide hotline if anyone is experiencing anything, only I can't read the number because I can't see it. So maybe someone knows it.
I got it. Sorry, I'm on dual screens and apparently it's not showing on dual screens.
Jennifer's playing.
Yeah, so the suicide hotline number is 1-800-273-8255.
55. Yes, I know the last part. So on to you, Marcie.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn it over to
actually Ridge.
Ridge.
Yeah.
This evening.
Hi, were you born in a circus? Because that's what just happened.
Well, welcome all to this evening. So tonight, we actually have a panel of male adoptees, and we're going to share a little bit of our bios with you. 2 weeks ago, I was on, and I'll give a little refresher. But I wanted to introduce Oliver and Reggie, and we're waiting for a couple of the other guys who wanted to be on to come around. So there'll be Rich Erlob and Jeff Hancock. In a twist of fate, 4 of us are also late discovery adoptees. So Reggie, Oliver, Jeff, and myself are part of a private Facebook group that is open to late discovery adoptees only. And so we've all known each other through that page for a while, but I'm looking forward to hearing them talk to you about their journey with adoption. And so I'm going to start with Oliver, if you're good.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Ridge. I've met with many of the male adoptees and late discovery adoptees. So we've related a lot of stories back and forth. I know that I shared this stage with Becky Drennan a few months ago, and some of you may have heard some of my story, but I'll relate exactly who I am and who I am as an adoptee. As Ridge mentioned, I am a late discovery adoptee. I was told by my parents when I was 17 years old that I was an adoptee. And at that time, it was shocking, but they told me as I was finishing high school and just about to join the military. My journey has been long and varied, and I would sorry, I'm hesitating here. So I would say that really my journey within this community started about 2 years ago. And that's when I got DNA results linking to my birth family. And at that time, I started connecting with groups and hearing other people's stories and trying to relate to, trying to find out the best way for me to deal with this news that I had been dropped on. And through this journey, I've done a lot of reflecting on who I am as an adoptee, and oftentimes we as adoptees compare each other's stories and whatnot. I was looking for. I'm an engineer, and when I was given this DNA evidence, I needed a formula to figure out what do I do with it, and so I checked out all the books from the library. I started joining groups, and I started trying to find the formula of how to solve this problem, just as an engineer would do. And I've come to find that there is no set formula to deal with these things. It's something you have to work through on your own as your own story. And in talking with many different adoptees, I've come to discover that there are those that have great experiences, those that have even more traumatic experiences throughout their lives. And I've come to reflect that my story, as everybody else's, is unique. I grew up in a Dutch Indonesian family. My adoptive parents are Dutch Indonesian. Which means the Netherlands at one time, Indonesia, the current country of Indonesia, was for a long time known as the Dutch East Indies, and it was a colony of the Netherlands. During World War II, they were occupied by the Japanese, and after their liberation from the Japanese, Indonesia declared their own independence. And so they asked those people who were half-bloods, who were not fully Indonesians, you can become Indonesian or you can go back to your homeland, which is the Netherlands in way cold Northern Europe. And my family, they were sent packing to the Netherlands, to a country that they had never lived in before. Now, when they get to the Netherlands was also recovering from the Second World War occupation by Germany. They had an infrastructure that was decimated. And the Dutch East Indies used to be a major source of income for the country. So the Netherlands, who is recovering from war, decimated economy, decimated infrastructure, just lost a major source of revenue. Now they had to take in thousands of their own citizens as refugees. And it was interesting for those Dutch Indonesians coming to the Netherlands that they were considered Dutch citizens, but these Dutch citizens were looked upon as savages coming from a tropical island, and they had classes on how to use utensils, how to use toilets, how to speak Dutch. So a lot of rejection. At that time, countries such as Australia, thank you, Pete, and the United States relaxed a lot of their immigration policies. and a lot of Dutch Indonesian people left the Netherlands and went to Australia, went to Southern California. And that's what my parents did. They came to Southern California. They adopted me from a Filipino family, or a Filipino mother. And so I was adopted into a family that I looked a lot like. And, you know, in these past 2 years, I've come to reflect on why our relationship worked, why I didn't feel left out. And I'm still working through it, but I think a lot of it is that I didn't feel left out because our whole family was feeling left out. And we were all adapting. We were all strangers in a strange land. I was a strange child in a strange family. And it's through that being, you know, rejected from 2 countries, being rejected from my mother, being rejected from, you know, a society that didn't understand who we are. We as a family came together and worked as a family, I guess you can say. And it's interesting to, if you go online and look at the Dutch Indonesian community, they're called Indos. All of them are very much family related. And if we meet another Dutch Indo family, they are our aunts and uncles. They are our family. So, you know, in our rejection, we've all coalesced into a family that tries to fit into the world that we're living in, and cling to each other. So that being said, and that's my reflection, thinking back about my years and being an adoptee, and then being a late discovery adoptee. As I said, my parents told me just as I was coming out of high school, going into the military. So I was really, that was fully in the midst of me finding my identity of who I was beyond my family, becoming a military person, and then school after that, and then getting married after school. You know, it was just trying to find out who I was. So my journey as an adoptee and seeking my family really wasn't at the forefront of my mind. Yes, you know, suddenly I've got this data, but you know, I had nothing to look for. And reflecting back, it wasn't until my wife and I had our first child that it struck me that I had a need. I had a need to seek out my birth family, and then since my daughter, you know, 24 years ago, this was before the internet. This was before all the resources that we have now. It was just a matter of poking here, poking there, doing some searches. And again, had very little information. And it wasn't until 3 or 4 years ago that we did a DNA test and discovered through DNA test, you know, matching on ancestry DNA. From that, I obtained my birth mother's name last year. Was it last year? Yeah, I guess it was last year. Yeah. I was looking for tools to help deal with this, and I came to the Indiana conference, which was a wonderful conference, eye-opening, wonderful people, great place to connect and find tools and find a community that just understands. And we were sitting at the lunch table, and someone asked me about my DNA results and you know, what other matches do I have? And I said, well, there's this close cousin. I haven't really looked into that yet, but so they said, well, pull it up real quick, and started looking at the numbers, and they said, well, with the CM count of this, that's a half brother, and that just blew me away. So from that data point, I was able to do more researching, and I was able to discover my birth father. So as of now, I'm currently in Facebook reunion with my birth father. We trade messages ever so often. He's a very guarded person, but I have done FaceTime and been talking with my half brother for the past few months, which has been really great. I only grew up with a sister, so it's odd to have a brother now. In fact, the other day we chatted for a while, so that's going well. On my birth mother's side, I've reached out a few times, still haven't heard any direct response of any of my correspondence and whatnot, and still working through that. So, yeah, so this group, the Adoption Network Cleveland group, the Male Adoptees Summit, I think that's called, that Rich heads up. They've been great resources in helping talk through things, helping deal with things, and again, through these past few years, helped me to formulate, why my story is unique and how does that help other people. And as a male, it's a very unique perspective. Going to the conferences and meeting many people. We males, I think, have grown up in a society that kind of challenges us in showing our emotions and how to deal with it. A lot of it is an expectation of bottling it up and trying to deal with it by ourselves. But what these conferences and what all this has done is really, and my faith community have helped me to realize that I'm not alone, and that these are things that we need to work out as groups, because we all have different perspectives and we all have different ways of seeing things, and it helps us to work through our own things. So I think it's a very important conversation to have. To allow males to deal with it, not only as an adoptee, but also as fathers, and as a society that it's so easy to be a bio father, but a bio parent, but not necessarily a father, if that makes sense. So that's my journey so far. Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you guys.
Hey, Oliver, before you go too far away, I'd like for you to relate, if you want, your military experience to your adoption kind of awareness.
Yeah, that's interesting. In our discussion a few weeks ago, I started reflecting on who I am as an adoptee, and then the jobs that the job field that I've taken. When I joined the military, I became what's commonly known as a forward observer. What it is I help direct indirect weapons fire, artillery pieces. And so my job actually was part of the artillery units. But when I do my job, I'm actually out with the infantry units. So we often joked that we were the bastard childs of the Army, because we belong to the artillery, but they didn't really want us, and we ran around with the infantry, but we didn't really belong to them. We're the artillery guys. So I don't necessarily think it was a conscious choice, but I just think it was a humorous choice that that reflecting back on my military career, I was a bastard child of the military. And then, my chosen field of study and my career field that I'm in now is I'm an aerospace engineer. And it's funny because if you're in the aerospace community, so many of us are, we grew up in an age in which my father went to go work for a company for 30 years. And those people in the aerospace industry you go where the work is. So, most of the people that I've worked with, they've worked for Boeing, they've worked for Lockheed, they've worked for Northrop Grumman, they've worked all these different companies, and there's no real loyalty to one certain company. It's just interesting that I've chosen a career that isn't a steady family. I mean, I always joke that we were, high-paid migrant workers, because we would migrate from one company to another company to another company. It's where the work was, because that's the way the aviation industry is. So I just think it's, again, I don't think it's necessarily a conscious choice, but I think it's just fascinating to, as an adoptee, to be in that kind of, these kind of communities that aren't necessarily beholden to one family, but we're a family in ourselves.
Well, thanks for that. Kind of the format for the rest of the evening, I'm gonna share a bit of my story. Some of you heard from me a couple of weeks ago, so I'm gonna give a really abbreviated version of that, in that that was 65 minutes of me talking and Marcie pulling her hair out because we didn't leave enough time for Q&A. So I'm gonna shorten that. If Jeff shows up, I'll give a quick bio of him, let him talk about his LDA experience. He has this wonderful story about a woman showing up at his wedding saying, "I'm Jeff's other mom," to Jeff's adoptive mom. And at this point, Jeff didn't know that he was adopted. So if Jeff gets on, I'll just leave that as a cliffhanger. I'll let him tell you that story. And then Rich, if he's out of work and can make it, he'll share. Otherwise, he's sharing next week, particularly about his work with legislation and helping adoptees to access their original birth certificates. So I'll share a little bit. If they get on, I'll introduce them, let them talk. Reggie, I mentioned earlier, is also a male adoptee, part of the LDA group. And at this point, Reggie is open to questions, but if he wants to share a bit of his story, I'll open that up to him. But then,
I will if you want me to.
It's up to you, man. Whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay.
Yeah, I'll talk when you get a chance.
All right. Then we'll open it up to questions. And this is something that we do every other year at Ian. We'll have other adoptees, birth parents, adoptee related. Do I say that wrong, Pam? I do. Ian. IAN. Should I say every? Okay. I like Ian. Anyway, don't let her distract you. I'll open up the room so that people can come in and talk to male adoptees. And remember, a couple weeks ago, when I mentioned male adoptees, I'm talking about individuals who identify as male. And, recognizing, of course, that there are individuals who recognize themselves as female, and then non-binary individuals. So if you have questions for us, we're happy to answer them, as we kind of go through this. Reggie, do you want to go now?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go talk now.
Reggie then.
I'll try to cut down on time because I am a talker. My story is, I'm trying to think how to explain this. Hopefully everyone knows who Jamie Foxx is. My parents are the color of Jamie Foxx. And as you see, this is the color of me. So I always had questions growing up about, I'm not different. There was only one other cousin who was my complexion. And for me, this is actually dark because of the summertime. I spend all day out in the sun. During the wintertime, even my baby pictures, I used to joke, my baby pictures was, the little white kid in the picture. So there was always questions. And I had one aunt when I was younger. I asked her, why don't I look like everyone else? And she said, well, Black people come in all shades and colors. Never thought about it. Never thought about it ever again. At age 19, I had a couple of daughters. One was black, one was white, literally, two different women. And my wife, who's my current wife, who's Caucasian, um, people gave her a lot of flack because my daughter was white, plain and simple. You know, a lot of questions. We ended up getting married. And then when my son was born, and, you know, I had questions also, but I didn't care. I loved them both. It didn't matter. My son was born, you know, this little blue-eyed, Hazel now, blonde-haired kid was born. So it's like, mm, you know, I was in the military by this time on a base, but it was, you know, still questions. So for me growing up, I'll go back to when I was younger. I grew up in an all black neighborhood, but went to an all white, I won't say white, majority white Catholic school. So I had to, as my friends told me, talk proper when I was at school and talk black when I was at home, which one of my friends lately called it. A lot of people actually call it code, not code speak or switch code. It's basically, I call it being a chameleon. I fit in wherever I am, which was a benefit for me when I was in the military, because depending on my position or depending on what job I did, by the way, Oliver, go Navy. Depending on what I did very well. Progressed, did multiple things, stayed in about 11 years. And then once I hit a point to where my family followed me around, it was time to go ahead and get out and get a regular job. I repaired medical equipment, biomedical engineer or biomedical electronics technician, whichever most people know it by, but we're the fix-it guys in the hospital. So, you know, living my life, being who I am. I'm 50 now. When I was 47, you know, 23andMe came along, you know, because of the way I am, always in the middle of everything. And because I was always brought up saying that I was black, white, and Native American, that a grandfather, quote unquote, was black. That's what I was told by my adopted family. So I did 23andMe, came back. By the way, I live a very interesting life. I have to say that before I get to the next statement. Came back, showed that I was 54% Caucasian, 46% African American, with a little, you know, Native American, very minimal Indonesia, Thai, things like that thrown in there. So first thing I did is I called my mother, asked her to do a DNA test. My mother's exact phrase was, "The FBI is still looking for me. I can't." So I say lived an interesting life. So I asked her about my sister. And my sister, she is dark. When I say dark, she is dark. And I always tell people, wasn't in the room for the conception, wasn't in the room for the birth, but I was there her entire life. So she is my mother's child, no questions asked. My sister, my adopted sister, agreed to do the DNA test. When it came back, it showed that we were not related. So that made me ask more questions, made me, at one point, my mom told me to ask you, she actually said the words, "ask your daddy." Me being, like Oliver said, a little bit of an engineering background, I had already had 3 separate possibilities or theories on what it could be. 1, I was adopted. 2, I was one of my father's children by another woman, which, you know, like the song says, dad laid it, wherever he put his hat was his home. Or I was kidnapped as a kid. So talked to my dad. He gave me some story. I mean, my dad didn't miss a beat. When I gave him my 3 theories, he said her name was Red, thought I was one of his girlfriends. That did not pan out. I end up talking to my stepmother, my adopted stepmother, and she knew stories. I'm friends with my dad's old girlfriends, adopted dad, old girlfriends. They heard stories. My father was a singer, so he knew a lot of musicians. My uncle was a manager for the Temptations at one time. Interesting life, I gotta say that. So that was a very plausible thing. But then on 23andMe, I did 23andMe. Then I did Ancestry, and I'm starting to see people pop up that are not within that circle. So I end up reaching out, testing my, my brother, my adopted brother by my father, and he was in vitro fertilization, or so there was no question of his parentage, who his mother and father was. He came back as not related to me, so that told me dad was not dad. At that point, I had started to, like Oliver said, not stalk, research, but, you know, pretty much if you give me a phone number or name or even a username, I can find you, I can find your family members, and I can find everything about you. That's how good I had gotten with multiple background services I have subscriptions to that I need to cancel. But so I end up finding my birth father's side, talking with them, reaching out to them, and narrowing it down to two brothers. One brother was one of the Memphis trash workers who, during that time, and the other brother, pretty much where he laid his hat was his home. It turned out to be him, and I'll try to be quick with that story. But once we realized which brother it was, they ghosted me. I mean, when I say ghosted, they changed their ancestry profile to where I could see everyone, to where their name didn't even show up. It was their alias that showed up. So I figured that was going to a dead end. It was also at the same time, because I was born in the state of Missouri. Missouri was doing their birth certificates, where they were opening up their birth certificates, but the mother and or father had the option to do the paperwork to not have me get my birth certificate. So at that point, I found out my father had passed in 2000. So I knew it was just on my mother's side. So I did not reach out to her. And that's when I found out my father was Black and my mother was Caucasian. I had also at that time reached out for my non-identifying information. Because of my military career and a lot of phone calls I've had to make or getting information, once I got my non-identifying information from the state, I actually called the person back. I realized that my mother, little things like, you know, on March 24th, I can't remember the exact age, let's say March 24th of 70, when I was born, she was 20. But yet when she did her interview with the adoption agency on April 10th, she was 22. So that told me that her date of birth was in between there. I mean, I went as far as looking at, because the non-identifying information gave religious information, things like that. I was looking at christening records, trying to find them at one point. That's how far I had, you know, went down the rabbit hole. But so I didn't want to contact my mother, birth mother's family. And at one point I had gotten to where, like I said, the father's side of the family had ghosted me once they realized, because of DNA, yes, I was his child. Yes, he was 40 years old. My mother was 20 or 21 at the time, and he was married. So they kind of, like I said, they just kind of disappeared. So I was at a dead end. I found as much information as I could with the names that I had. So December 31st was the deadline for I knew my mother to do the paperwork to not let me get my birth certificate. So when I called the state of Missouri, you know, the lady on the other end, she had all the information. She just couldn't tell me. But like, go back to how I was used to in the military, you know, it's like, I know you can't give me the answer. You know you can't give me the answer, but I'm going to ask these questions that do indirect answers. So her and I played around with that. She confirmed that my mother's age, She confirmed that that was possibly my father, the name I got her, gave her. As she put it, it wouldn't have been anyone else but the name you gave me. Things like that. So it was a definite that's who it was. But I was at a dead end. So it was one night let's say October, November. I was just like, drank a little too much and was just like, okay, I'm done. I contacted a first cousin and I said, look, either your father or your mother is my mother's brother or sister. I was born in 70. This is my story. Here's my contact information. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes later, I'd gotten a phone call and she goes, hey, this is such and such. She said her name. I played dumb. I had already backgrounded her, knew she was married and divorced. Researched, knew she was married and divorced, knew her real name, not her name that was online. And like I said, played dumb when she called. She told me her name. Then she goes, oh, this is my name online. And she said, I got your message. I talked to my father. He says, yes, his sister had a child. They've been looking for you all this time. At that point, she gave me my mother's phone number, my uncle's phone number, my sister's phone number. She gave me every last phone number she could. That night, I talked to two of my birth sisters, half sisters. But my birth mom likes to spend a lot of time at a lake, so she didn't have good cell reception. But eventually, I did talk to her a few days later. And it was nice. It answered a lot of questions as far as, one, why I look different, and why, I won't say mindset. I grew up, both sets of my family, birth family, were farmers. My parents were one generation removed from plowing a field, both sides. So that explained a lot of my natural engineering ability or creative ability, because my adopted family were both singers. My mom was a singer. My dad was a singer. I can't carry a tune in a bucket if I tried. Like everybody else, I can give a halfway decent, amazing grace, but other than that, won't happen. So I've met my adopted family. My birth family, my three sisters. I have an older sister. And with my birth family, like I said, because my dad, wherever he laid his hat was his home, I have a bunch of younger brother and sisters. I was always the older. But with my birth family, I actually have an older sister, which was nice to have someone older. And her and I, it was funny, the first time I met her, we were sitting there standing, and my birth mother commented on it. She goes, you all stand the exact same way. And we looked at each other, and it was just a natural, comfortable position for me. And we both stood the same way. But it's been an interesting, journey, going from always having questions as a kid to, my aunt saying Black people come in all shades and colors, to finding out that, I was adopted, that I'm not related to the people I grew up with. But I guess for me, and there was I don't know who all was on before the meeting actually opened up. For me, it was a benefit being adopted. And I say this, I wouldn't, if we had time machines, I would not change one single thing, because of the simple fact that I have 4 children, 4 grandchildren, that would not have happened if I'd stayed with my birth family. I grew up Black. I grew up in a Black family. If I didn't, I would have grown up with a single white mother. Life would have been a little bit, because like I tell people, I have a good base tan. Life would have been a little bit harder growing up with her than it would have been in a Black family, being what's considered light-skinned. Talked to my mother, finally admitted, adopted mother and father finally admitted. And, at one point, my adopted mother admitted, because I had a rough childhood, I'll put it that way. she finally apologized at one point and said, I treated you harder after my mom and dad got divorced, adopted mom and dad got divorced, because she did not know how to raise a male child. So yeah, you know, I got a few beatings I didn't deserve. Some I did, a majority of them I didn't. But to compensate, she got me anything I wanted from a scientific point of view. I had books, microscopes at a young age. I had engineering books, something that Radio Shack used to sell a long time ago called a 201. You can make 200 different electronic experiments with one. So that's how I was brought up. That's how I got into the field I'm in now. That would not have happened with my birth family. Even talking to my sister, she said it was hard. She said it was hard just for them, let alone to get by, let alone having a biracial male child in the house would have even been a little bit harder because of the, you know, yes, this would have been in the 70s when I would have been born in Missouri. In the 70s, there was still a lot of racism, a lot, and it would have been harder on her. And that was part, and also in the non-identifying information, that was one of the reasons why she gave me up for adoption, because I was a biracial child. You know, she grew up, you know, I always say, you know, my birth mom is as country as cornbread. I mean, she's white, but she picked cotton as a kid. That's how country she is. So yeah, it would have been a little different for me being there. But you know, I love it now because I have twice as many sisters. I have, from my birth mother's side, I have more family. My family's just gotten bigger. It also explains why my daughter and son with my wife, you know, look white, which me and my wife recently talked about, that my adopted mom knew that my birth mom was Caucasian. She should have said something when my daughter was born instead of acting like my wife had slept around and my child was born, fathered by someone else. She had every opportunity to say something and she never did. Sorry, I'm jumping back and forth, but I mean, it's been a wild ride. Finding out I was adopted, it answered so many questions. As my wife said, you already knew you were adopted. You just didn't have the proof before 23andMe. But on the other hand, because of 23andMe, you know, I used to give on Facebook, I used to give DNA tests away. You know, you gave me a reason why you wanted a DNA test, I would give it away because I've DNA tested all of my family members. We have a family account, birth family, adopted family, my children. One of the things, because talking with my wife, my daughter, she always thought that I may not have been her father. So of course, when her results came back, you know, I don't remember exactly what I texted her because she lives in Spain now. Was she in Japan at the time? No, she was in Spain. You know, I'm your daddy. You know, you can't get out of that. Things like that, joking about it. But it was finding out I was adopted and DNA answered so many questions for me. It explained literally why, not just physically, but mentally, why I was different from the rest of my family. I mean, to cut it short, when my mom told me my adopted mom told me she couldn't do DNA because the FBI was still looking for her. Yeah, that I believed her. That's not a stretch for her. So, but that's my story. I mean, that's it.
Thanks, Reggie. So it is kind of funny. We've got other LDA representatives here today. We've got Chris and Pete, and then other male adoptees. And that's one of the things that I've really appreciated about IAN is that they have always made space for the male adoptees. It was an inclusive, intentional effort that Pam and Jen and Marcie put in. So So I've always felt really encouraged by the leadership there to, foster these male relationships, to talk about, what are some of the things, because in the adoptee experience, there's a lot of overlap between, male adoptees, female adoptees, people who are non-binary. There's a lot of overlap, but there are also moments where sitting with somebody, that shares your gender identification, there's a level of energy and comfort. So I'm glad for these chats. I'm thankful for these men who are willing to, come in and talk about their story. For my own, I'm also an LDA. And so I just wanted to share a bit of that. Finding out that I was an adoptee at 19. I had a son that I had relinquished into adoption, obviously not knowing yet that I was adopted. And it was an open adoption, so I was always able to stay with him. I saw him a couple times a year. I got the customary letters and pictures and all that stuff. But I always knew, he always knew who I was. I was always around. So his experience was a little bit different than mine on the adopted side. I went to his adoptive aunt's house for Thanksgiving in 2005. His bio mom came. I took a couple of my kids, and his adoptive mom was there. So it was the first time since he had been born that all of us were in this same space together. And then about a month after that, I got a letter from the state of Kansas saying, we have some information that may be of interest to you. Please reach out when you have an opportunity. So I did shortly after the new year. And while I was talking to the social worker, her name was Tina, she confirmed my identification. And then she said, well, since you are this person that we're looking for, we wanted to let you know that the birth mother is wanting to be in touch with you. And of course, my mind immediately goes to Rebecca, Zach, our relinquished son's birth mother. And I was puzzled by that because I thought, well, we just had Thanksgiving dinner together. We have mutual friends. Why wouldn't she just reach out to me directly? So I listened to Tina, and I let her talk a little bit about, what all that was going. I asked her a few questions about the social work side. What does this mean? And then once we kind of got to, a place where my questions were answered, she had confirmed my identification. She then comes back and says, so would you like your birth mother's information? And I put the brakes on it. I'm like, whoa, wait, I'm sorry. You said my birth mother, and I think you mean Zach's birth mother. And Tina says, no, your birth mother. And I said, well, but I'm not adopted. And then Tina says, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, but I don't think that I should be the first person to tell you this. You're adopted. And so I'm 35 years old, and this is the first time that anyone has overtly said to me, you don't share DNA with these people. Which was a shock. There were obvious places, like Reggie said in his story, it answered so many questions. Like immediately I was like, yeah, of course, I'm adopted. And it was a very long period of investigating, my own memories, my family, what should I have realized? And thankfully I got connected to I got connected to Pam, so I got into an adoptee community. I was able to foster those relationships. But I also got connected to the LDA community. And sometimes I wish that other adoptees could be like on the LDA page just as a fly on the wall for when somebody finds out that they were adopted, and we've got people, 17, is kind of the youngest, 18, 19, but then we have people coming in who are 70 and they're finding out for the first time that they're adopted. And it's like, thankfully, Facebook has a means to create a private group. And so on day 2 after discovery, they can log into the LDA page and find, a community of almost 450 people now that are like, yep, been there. That's exactly what we went through too. Okay, so LDA, male experience, and I don't see Jeff or Rich on. And so what I'm going to do is open this up into questions. And how we'll do this, you can of course raise your hand. I'm not looking at the gallery view. Like I've got 2 pages here. I don't really want to flip between them. So if you can raise your hand or unmute yourself for a second, say, hey, yo, I've got a question. And if you have a question that is specific for one of the 3 of us, then, say, this question is for Reggie, this question is for Oliver, or if you just want to ask a question generally, and we will try to be succinct so that we can answer as many questions as you may have. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Awesome.